The soldier lay on his side on the broken concrete floor, breathing in short gasps, as if each breath were a bullet piercing his chest. Smoke covered everything, the smell of burning gunpowder mixed with dust and dried blood. Outside, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Measured, heavy, too organized to be ordinary soldiers. It was them, the SS, the perfect army of terror. The boots pounding on the destroyed ground sounded like a countdown clock to death. Each approaching step said the same. "Thing, it's over for you." The sniper pressed his rifle against his body as if it were the last thing connecting him to life. His brow was sweaty, his mouth dry, a constant ringing in his ears. He knew he was alone. He knew no one would come for him. His unit had been crushed hours before in a hail of artillery that turned the entire neighborhood into a graveyard of bricks and twisted iron. Now, the building where he hid was just a skeleton about to collapse, and he, a wounded man with a single bullet in his magazine. One bullet. On one side, an exhausted, bleeding sniper with no escape route. On the other, an elite troop trained to hunt down exactly men like him. The footsteps stopped. Silence. That heavy, suffocating silence that makes even the heart beat slower, so as not to attract attention. The sniper closed his eyes for a moment, just enough to feel the weight of everything that had happened up to that point. He knew he wasn't the best. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the most decorated. But he had one thing the men who came to kill him didn't have, something he himself was still trying to understand. The wind rushed in through the broken window, shaking a piece of burnt fabric hanging from a rebar. Dust swirled in the air. Across the corridor, an SS soldier shouted a short order. They were positioning themselves, preparing to enter. They didn't miss. They didn't improvise. They simply executed. Their doctrine was clear. Crush, surround, suffocate. And there was a perfect target, wounded with little ammunition, trapped inside a destroyed building. A target that should already be dead. The sniper braced his elbow on the ground, strained to lift his head a few inches, and looked at the wall in front of him. There was almost nothing there, just cracks, shadows, and a small shard of something glistening among the dust. A piece of glass, bent, cracked, dirty, but still capable of reflecting something. His eyes lingered a second longer on that glint. It seemed like nothing. It seemed like trash. But at that instant, with death approaching down the corridor, that tiny reflection ignited a strange spark in his mind. Outside, the boots began to move again. They had split up. One group would come up the stairs, another from the side, and a third would circle around the courtyard, blocking any exit. He knew how they operated. He knew because he had seen others die exactly like that, cornered, without a chance. And yet, something inside him refused to accept that it would all end there, on that cold ground, like just another nameless body amidst the ruins. His finger touched the piece of glass, felt the roughness of the edges, the coldness, the crack in the middle, and it was as if, for a brief second, everything became too silent. It wasn't just a lost shard. It could be something else. Outside, the SS men were already ready, certain that they were about to eliminate another target effortlessly. They thought they had him cornered, that he was finished, that it was just a matter of going in and finishing the job. They were absolutely confident of one thing: that sniper had no way out. But they were wrong, very wrong. And they were about to discover how a crazy trick with a simple piece of mirror would transform an ordinary man into the most lethal threat they had ever faced. After everything you've heard so far, can you imagine what a simple piece of mirror is about to cause in the middle of a war? Before continuing, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me bring more intense stories like this one. And if you want to participate even more, comment below what city and country you're watching from. It's always amazing to know how far these stories reach. Let's continue. The corridor still echoed with the footsteps of enemy soldiers, but for the first time since it all began, the sniper felt something strange in his chest. Not hope, not courage, but an ancient, almost forgotten feeling that came from long before the war. A feeling he had known since childhood, when he spent hours hidden in his father's plantation, observing the animals unseen. It was that same silent instinct, that same reading of the environment, that gaze that perceived details that no one else saw. And now in that icy ruin, wounded, tired, surrounded by men who beat and executed without blinking, that instinct had awakened again. He took a deep breath. trying to ignore the pain in his broken rib, and held the piece of glass between his fingers. The rough, icy, trembling texture reflected a faint gleam, so small that no one in a hurry would notice. But he wasn't in a hurry. There, trapped on the brink of death, time seemed to stretch, as if the whole world were waiting to see what he would do with that fragment. Meanwhile, memories began to mingle with reality. He remembered his difficult childhood, the small, noisy house, his parents exhausted from life in agriculture. He remembered how, as a boy, he had to take care of the animals, watch out for pests and scare away predators with improvised tricks. Once he attached a piece of metal to a branch to reflect light and confuse a fox prowling around the hen house. Another time, he used water in a can to see the movement of the undergrowth without having to lift his head. Back then, they were silly survival tricks. Now, inside a building almost destroyed by war, those tricks returned as weapons. But he wasn't a hero. At least, he didn't see himself that way. He was just an ordinary man with calloused hands, who always believed that life was hard work, silence, and resistance. He never sought glory, never dreamed of killing, never wanted to use a rifle for anything other than hunting. The war stole everything he was and transformed him into something he never asked to be. Even so, there inside, with the enemies preparing the execution, he felt a flame ignite. If he was going to die, it wouldn't be as an easy target. It wouldn't be as just anybody left on the ground. If he was going to fall, he would fall fighting. He wiped the blood from his eyebrow with his soiled sleeve. Despite the intense pain, he forced himself to keep his train of thought. He observed the corridor through the broken crack in the wall. The angle was bad, the position too exposed. If he tried to aim directly, he would die before pulling the trigger. They knew exactly where he was. They were waiting for the slightest movement. They were disciplined, cold, lethal, but they didn't know about the mirror. He carefully positioned the shard of glass, resting it against a piece of broken brick for stability. He moved it with millimeter precision until he managed to reflect part of the corridor without revealing his position. His vision was distorted, shaky, cracked in the middle, but it worked. He could see shadows moving, silhouettes approaching, the metallic glint of weapons. At that moment, a pang of fear shot through his chest. Real, deep fear. The kind that paralyzes your hands and tightens your stomach. Not the fear of dying, he was already prepared for that, but the fear of failing, before even trying, of dying without using the only improbable resource he had found, of wasting what could be his last chance. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, remembering when he used to watch deer in the forest. Back then, he would stand motionless for hours, gazing at the reflection in puddles, waiting for the animal to appear within easy reach. The patience that rural life had taught him now pulsed within him like a secret weapon. When he opened his eyes, something changed. There was no more trembling in the hand that held the rifle. There was no more hesitation. It was as if all the weight of a hard life had prepared him precisely for that moment, an impossible instant in which a piece of mirror could decide between life and death. The first enemy appeared in the reflection, advancing slowly down the corridor. He approached, cautiously, as if aware of the danger, but confident that the target was too weak to react. The sniper adjusted his sights millimeter by millimeter, using only the reflection in the cracked mirror to calculate the enemy's exact position. Every fiber of his arm burned with tension. Sweat dripped from his chin. He felt his heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to burst from his chest. His finger moved smoothly onto the trigger, as if the rifle were a natural extension of his hand. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The gunshot echoed like thunder within the shattered walls. In reflex, the enemy's body fell backward like a lifeless mannequin. The other soldiers immediately retreated, startled and bewildered. They were absolutely certain the sniper was incapacitated. That bullet at that impossible angle, with no exposure whatsoever, made no sense. It shouldn't be possible, but he was, because he wasn't what they thought he was. The sniper took a deep breath, felt the pain intensify in his ribs, but felt something even greater burning inside his chest. He had won the first move, the first step, and now he knew that that small, broken mirror was his most powerful weapon. Outside, the soldiers shouted, rearranging their formation. Their fright was only the beginning. Fear was creeping in, and he could feel that the war, in that forgotten corner of the front, was about to change completely. He was about to become something he never imagined, something that even the SS soldiers would fear. But I was also about to discover that greatness always comes at a price. He wasn't born for war, not for the rifle, not for medals, not for carrying the weight of lives that would depend on his finger on the trigger. In fact, if someone had observed him years before, they would never have imagined that this skinny, sunburnt boy, with cracked feet from dry earth, would become the nightmare of one of the most feared forces in the world. He was just a farmer's son, lost in the interior of a country that saw its children dragged into battles they didn't understand. He grew up among old wooden sheds, stacked sacks of grain, rusty tools, and an exhausting routine that began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. Life hadn't treated him kindly. From childhood he learned that nothing came easy. There was no rest, luxury, or choice. There was work, always work. Planting in the hard ground, harvesting in the sweltering heat, lifting sacks of corn bigger than himself. Hearing his father repeat, through clenched teeth, that a real man doesn't complain, he gets things done. And he did, even unwillingly, even without understanding, even feeling that the whole world was too big and he too small to make any difference. But it was precisely this hard life that shaped something within him. While other children learned to play, he learned to observe, to hear the sound of the wind changing before the rain arrived, to perceive which animal was approaching, just by the rustling of the leaves, to see movement in the woods without raising his head, using reflections in the water, improvised glasses, crushed cans. It was like that, in silence, in the solitude of the fields, that his instincts were born. And instinct in war is worth more than any military diploma. The father was never affectionate, but he taught something that would be forever etched in his memory. You don't need to be the strongest. You just need to be the most attentive. And he went. Attention was all he had. When war came to his village, bringing uniforms, draft orders, and fear, he had no choice. He was torn from the land he knew and thrown into a world where every step meant possible death. His first days in the army were a shock. Men shouting, weapons jamming, dust in the air, soldiers falling beside him, desperate officers trying to organize a chaos that grew with each enemy offensive. He wasn't a trained soldier. He was a farmer with a rifle, a man who never thought of killing, a quiet fellow who spoke little but observed everything. Perhaps that's why his first superiors put him in the position of sniper, not because they believed in him, but because no one else wanted the job. Shooting from a distance seemed easy to the others, until they discovered it required nerves of steel, a steady hand, and almost superhuman patience. He had all of that, but not because he was a prodigy. Yes, because life had broken him in just the right way. The first time you hit an enemy, you felt nauseous. The second time he felt fear. The third time he felt nothing. And that's when he realized that war would make him something he never wanted to be. But at the same time, he recognized that if he didn't fight, he would die. And if he died, others would die because of it. The responsibility weighed more than the rifle. Over time, the other soldiers began to notice that there was something different about him. He saw angles that no one else could. He calculated distances by sound. He aimed without having to raise his head too high. It was as if he had been born with an invisible lens in his eyes. But he knew the truth. It wasn't talent. It was necessity. It was survival. It was the result of years living in an environment where any mistake cost food on the table or a sick animal. In war, those same mistakes cost lives, and he couldn't allow that. When he received his first rifle with a scope, he felt that this weapon was not a killing machine. It was a tool, like a shovel, a hoe, a sickle. The difference was that now his job was not to cultivate, it was to prevent terror from advancing. He wasn't seeking glory. He didn't think he was special. He didn't see himself as a hero. Deep down, he was the same farm boy with tired shoulders, calloused hands, and a mind that never stopped observing the world around him. The war only did one thing. It transformed the old tricks of rural life into silent weapons, and he was about to transform that broken piece of mirror into the deadliest trick the front had ever seen. The building trembled with each distant explosion. Tiny particles of dust fell from the ceiling like dirty snow, and the air grew increasingly heavy with the smell of burnt cement and hot metal. The sniper knew that if he lifted one more inch, he would be dead. The enemy was now angry, and when the SS were angry, There was no mercy, no hesitation. They came to finish the job. They always did. But there, lying on the floor, his breath failing and his vision blurring from the pain accumulating in his body, something seemed different. The small piece of mirror he had found before, cracked, crooked, dirty, now shone with an almost provocative insistence. It was as if the object were calling to him, offering a tiny, absurd, improbable chance, but a chance nonetheless. He held it again, carefully twisting it between his fingers so as not to cut his hand. Light streamed in through the shattered window and hit the shard of glass, creating broken, distorted reflections that danced on the walls like tiny ghosts of light. This wasn't just a piece of mirror. It was an angle, a deviation, a trick, a mistake in the SS's perfect pattern, and any mistake was an open door to survival. That's when the memory came like a bolt of lightning. The fox from the hen house. He was just a teenager when his father sent him to protect the chickens from a predator that had been attacking at night. The fox was clever. It always appeared. When he wasn't looking, always through blind spots, always where no one expected it. He spent nights awake trying to figure out how to catch the animal, until one night he used the reflection of a blade hanging in the coop. The fox, seeing the glint, changed its path, and that's where he caught the animal. An animal only needs to believe that you are somewhere else. The phrase flashed through his mind with frightening clarity. He didn't need to aim directly. He didn't need to expose his head. He didn't need to challenge the SS snipers at their own game. He needed to force them to believe that he was in a place where, in fact, he wasn't. With trembling hands, he pressed the cracked mirror against the remains of a fallen beam. He adjusted its position, tilted the angle, tested the reflection. The image was imperfect but sufficient. He could see the corridor through the reflection, and more importantly, the reflection could show him the opposite direction. He could aim without being seen, shoot without exposing himself. Confuse trained men with what was essentially a useless piece of broken glass. It was madness, but it was the only thing possible. And sometimes in war, madness is the only logic that works. With the rifle resting on his wounded arm, he aligned the sights so that the target could only be seen by reflection. This was against any military manual. No instructor would allow it. No trained soldier would dare to try. Aiming at a mirror was asking to miss the shot, or worse, to give away his position. But he had no choice. And inside him a voice told him that this was exactly what he needed to do. The soft sound of enemy boots echoed again. They were advancing faster now. They were confident after reorganizing the troop. They always advanced in an organized fashion. First 2 scouts, then the main group, then the sniper covering every movement. He just needed a moment, an angle, a fraction of a second. In the mirror, the first silhouette appeared. A soldier holding his weapon close to his body, advancing cautiously, expecting to find the corpse of an exhausted sniper. The enemy came closer, stepping on debris, unaware that his own shadow was visible in that cracked reflection. The sniper adjusted his sights once more, tightened his grip on the trigger, took a deep breath, and he shot. The shot pierced the corridor with absurd, unerring, almost impossible precision. The soldier fell, bewildered by what had happened. The others recoiled, instantly, shocked by the shot coming from an angle that simply didn't exist. They couldn't identify where the shot had come from. It was as if the sniper had emerged from the concrete itself, as if he were in 10 places at once. And it was there, in that second, that he realized the extent of his trick. The mirror was not just an improvised object. It was a psychological weapon, a mechanism of confusion, an invisible blow against the rigid mathematical logic of enemy soldiers. They believed in perfection. He believed in survival. They followed doctrine. He followed his instincts. They expected the obvious. He would do the impossible. The SS began shouting orders down the corridor, trying to reorganize the attack. But their trust was broken, and when trust broke, the war changed. And for the first time since the battle had begun, he felt he had the upper hand. A broken piece of mirror had done that. A trick so simple it bordered on the ridiculous, but brilliant enough to transform an ordinary man into something no one imagined he could face. A shadow with a rifle, a ghost in the darkness, death reflected, and they still had no idea of the terror they were about to face. When they advanced again, he would be ready. And this time it wouldn't just be one shot, it would be the beginning of a legend. After the first impossible shot, The corridor plunged into a tense, almost sickly silence. It wasn't the natural silence of war, it was a silence of doubt, of disbelief. The SS wasn't used to making wrong predictions or being confused. They always advanced with absolute certainty about where the enemy was, how many there were, how they would react. But now, in that broken building, facing a sniper who should have been nearly dead, something had broken within their minds. They had lost control. And when a trained soldier loses control, he loses everything. The sniper realized this immediately. He was just a wounded man, yes, but there, in those few meters of bricks and smoke, he had just become something bigger, an unpredictable shadow, an enemy that didn't follow logic, a man who saw through a cracked reflection and could kill without being seen. From that moment on, war ceased to be about balance and became psychological terror. The SS tried to reorganize the advance. Harsh words echoed, short, quick orders demanding discipline. The scouts were replaced by more experienced snipers. The unit's corporal shouted instructions to cover every possible angle. They would advance again, but this time with redoubled caution. They knew he was still there, but they didn't know where, and that was poison in their minds. The second advance began slowly, heavily, calculatedly. The sniper, now with his reflection aligned in a different position, observed everything through the mirror while the enemy walked as if fearing the very air. Their tension was almost palpable. The SS advanced with their weapons drawn, aiming at every corner, every shadow, expecting the shot to come from the left, the right, from above, but never from the reflection. The second soldier appeared at the edge of the mirror, just the tip of his helmet, then his shoulder, then his tense face, eyes wide, sweating even in the cold. The sniper bit his lip to contain the pain radiating from his rib. He adjusted his sights. He breathed. He fired. The body fell backward without even understanding what had hit it. This time, the screams came immediately. Screams of warning, screams of confusion, screams of fear. Fear. The SS felt fear. They didn't know where he was. They didn't know where to look. They didn't know what that fragment of glass was doing. And worse, they didn't know how to defend themselves against something like that. The third death came minutes later. A short, precise, almost soft shot. The enemy fell to his knees before collapsing completely. And that's when panic took hold. The soldiers retreated, leaving the corridor as if the floor had become an invisible minefield. One of them shouted that there was more than one sniper. Another said the sniper was on the ceiling. Another swore he saw a flash coming from the opposite side. They were broken, but not physically, psychologically. Every mind in that group was now battling the worst feeling of war, the feeling of being hunted without understanding how. The sniper seized the moment and repositioned the mirror. He changed the angle. He shifted the focus. He was no longer a soldier. He was a ghost, a torment, a silent predator. He studied the SS's movements like one studies the behavior of a wounded animal, unpredictable, desperate, dangerous, but vulnerable. The legend began there. The soldiers began to whisper things. They believed he had help, that there were 2, 3, maybe 4. One of the leaders tried to silence the rumors, but he couldn't, because every man, when he sees the impossible happen before his own eyes, loses the ability to reason logically. They began to believe they were facing something beyond human comprehension. One of them murmured, "The shadow of the mirror." Another replied, "The reflexive death." The names emerged spontaneously, fueled by fear. And while the enemy crumbled emotionally, the sniper, even wounded, felt a new kind of strength within his chest. Not arrogance, not bloodlust, but the awareness that, for the first time, he had the advantage. His mind was clear. His breathing, though labored, found a rhythm. He understood every inch of that destroyed environment. He knew where each piece of concrete could serve as a support for the mirror. He knew how to make the light work for him. He had become, unintentionally and unplanned, the deadliest sniper on that front. 3 deaths became 5. 5 became 7. 7 became 12. Time seemed distorted. He no longer knew if he had been fighting for minutes or hours. Each shot was an enormous effort. Each adjustment in the mirror was a new pain in his broken rib. But none of that mattered, because he had a mission to survive and stop those men from advancing. And with each enemy fall, the SS sank deeper into despair. They weren't trained to deal with the unpredictable. They weren't made to fight against tricks. They believed in absolute strength, in the perfect war machine, but their perfection could not overcome the impossible. And in that ruined building, on that forgotten corner, an ordinary man was giving a lesson in psychological warfare to one of the most feared forces in history, and it wouldn't be easy to stop him. The SS finally understood that they were not facing an ordinary enemy. It wasn't an ordinary sniper. It wasn't a desperate defender making lucky shots. It was something different, something that didn't fit into any military manual. A man who had transformed a shard of mirror into a supernatural weapon. A ghost that tore through their ranks without ever showing its face. Something that instilled fear even in men who swore they felt no fear. They realized that as long as they continued to follow the usual protocol, they would be taken down one by one. And so they did what the SS did when faced with unexpected resistance. They sent in the best, the coldest, the most methodical, the elite hunters. And that's when the real hunt began. The sniper first heard silence, a silence different from the one that followed the shots. It was a heavy, calculated silence, revealing that the men coming now were not advancing in haste, nor with the chaos of ordinary soldiers. They came like predators, slow, disciplined, coordinated. Each of their steps was studied, each movement precise. The enemy started using smoke grenades, trying to neutralize reflections. They began extinguishing light sources, creating shadows that prevented the mirror from reflecting favorable angles. Even their shots changed. Now they sought planned ricochets, as if they had studied their position with extreme care. The game had changed. A lot. The sniper realized it quickly. He was no longer fighting frightened men. He was fighting experts, men who had dedicated their lives to hunting targets like him. The first serious attack came when they tried to bring down the entire floor of the building. An explosion made the walls tremble as if they were made of paper. He was thrown against the rubble. The air left his chest as if he had been punched with metal. The world spun. His vision darkened. Suddenly everything was dust, pain, and a relentless silence. He tried to move, but a piece of concrete trapped his leg. The pain was so intense that his stomach churned. For a few seconds, he believed he had reached the end. But in the midst of his stupor, he heard boots approaching. 3 steps, then 2 more. They were coming to confirm his death. And there, buried, wounded, breathless, he realized, greatness always comes at a price. With all the strength he had left, he pushed the concrete aside, sliding his body like a cowering animal. The mirror, miraculously intact, glittered a few inches away, dusty. He crawled toward it, the pain in his ribs radiating like fire. The footsteps were too close. The soldier's breathing was audible. They whispered, probably certain he was unreachable, crushed under the weight of the rubble. He wedged the mirror between 2 stones, creating a minimal angle, ridiculous, improbable, almost useless. But it was all he had. The first soldier entered from the side, aiming downwards. The second one came. Right after. He pulled the trigger. The shot pierced the distorted reflection, and the first soldier fell as if pulled by invisible ropes. The second froze, turned around, confused, aiming in the wrong place, and that was all he needed. The second shot echoed, dry, precise, deadly. The bodies tumbled to the ground and the building plunged back into silence. But this time, the sniper didn't feel victorious. He felt the weight of the blood on his fingers, the weight of his short breath, the weight of his body that no longer responded with the same precision. The war was taking its toll. The SS did not back down. On the contrary, it intensified the hunt. Grenades came from all sides, attempting to envelop him in dust and impossibility. Shots came from supposed blind spots. Coordinated shouts followed, trying to attract his attention, trying to make him move on impulse. They were studying every inch, every reaction, every detail. They were prepared to destroy the entire building, if necessary. And they almost succeeded. During one of the attacks, a beam plummeted from the ceiling. He tried to roll to the side, but wasn't fast enough. The heavy wood fell on his already broken rib. The shock blurred his vision, and pain shot through his body like a hot blade. For a few seconds he stopped breathing. He simply couldn't. It was too much pain, too much blood, too much exhaustion. He thought of his father. No field. In the fox. In the mirror. and he understood that he couldn't. Stop. With his right arm still functional, he pulled the mirror closer even though he couldn't stand fully upright. The beam pressed against his chest, making it difficult to breathe. But he positioned the mirror anyway, millimeter by millimeter, using his ankle for support, his shoulder as leverage, each muscle burning as if it were on fire from the inside. That's when he heard a sound he would never forget. The metallic click of a sniper rifle being cocked on the other side of the hallway. The SS had sent their best sniper, and that man came to kill him. The enemy approached slowly, each step firm, confident, deadly. There was no more panic, no more turmoil, no more chaos. Now it was a duel. 2 minds, 2 sharpshooters, 2 men who knew that only one would leave. The sniper took a deep breath, ignoring the pain that nearly made him faint. He adjusted the mirror. He brought his eye to the scope. Sweat dripped down his forehead, mixed with blood. And he waited. He waited for the perfect moment. He waited for the right moment. He waited for the slightest mistake from the other sniper. A glint appeared in the mirror, then a fragment of the helmet, then the shadow of the weapon. He pulled the trigger. The shot pierced the hallway and silenced that threat once and for all. But the effort was too great. His body gave way. My arm trembled. Breathing failed. He was alive, but for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could continue. The price of greatness was exacting its toll. The smell of smoke no longer lingered in the air, as if it had clung to his lungs. With each breath he tasted iron on his tongue. His whole body felt heavy, his arm almost too weak to hold the rifle. The building was mutilated, the floor covered in brick fragments, ammunition casings and dried blood. Outside, the war still raged, but inside, at that specific point, something different had happened. A single man had stopped the advance of an entire troop. He didn't know how many had fallen. At a certain point, the numbers ceased to matter. 10, 15, 20. Some later said there were many more. What he knew was simple. The SS hadn't managed to get through. The shouts of command diminished. The footsteps retreated. The explosions receded. What began as an overwhelming attack ended in hesitation. They no longer wanted to enter that building. They no longer wanted to cross that narrow corridor where death came from an impossible angle. In the cracked reflection of the mirror, he saw the last movement. The troop retreating, dragging some bodies, leaving others behind. Fear had done what bullets alone could not. Those men no longer believed in their own invincibility. And when belief falls, the empire crumbles from within. He tried to stand, but his body wouldn't obey. His legs trembled, his ribs throbbed, the world spun slowly. He knelt, then sat, leaning his back against a broken column. He looked at the rifle resting in his lap, then at the small, dirty, blood-stained mirror lying beside it. That tiny piece of glass, which anyone else would step on without noticing, had become a weapon as powerful as any tank, not because it was magic, but because an ordinary man had the courage and enough desperation to use it in a way no one had ever tried before. Hours later, he didn't know exactly how much time had passed. He heard different voices. They weren't German. They were theirs. Allied troops entering, investigating, calling out. When they finally found him, lying among the rubble with his rifle still near his hand, they thought he was dead. They only realized he was breathing when he moved his fingers, trying to reach the mirror. They carried him out as if carrying a broken burden. He saw the sky in pieces, amidst blurred faces. He heard disjointed words. Sniper. He held them off all by himself. You have no idea what this guy did. He didn't answer. He didn't have the strength. And deep down, he didn't know how to receive praise. He was just a farmer's son who had done what he needed to do to avoid dying. Official reports saw numbers. They tallied casualties, compared maps, marked that building as a point of heroic resistance. The story reached the ears of higher-ranking officers, then crossed borders. In the trenches, rumors began to circulate about a sniper who aimed through a broken mirror and drove the SS mad. Some called him the ghost of the reflection, others the sniper of the mirror. No one knew his name for sure. Few had seen his face. But everyone knew one thing. Wherever he had been, the most feared men of the war retreated. Time passed. The war, which seemed eternal, finally began to recede. Troops returned home with medals on their chests, scars on their souls, and stories that no one quite believed. He returned too, not for parades, not for speeches. He returned to the same harsh land that had raised him. The countryside was different, but the smell was the same. The house, smaller than it had, seemed in his memory. The silence heavier than any explosion. He stored the uniform at the bottom of the trunk. He never wanted to see the rifle again. What he brought back from the war, besides the marks on his body, was only a small bundle of cloth, hidden in the inside pocket of his jacket. Inside, a shard of mirror, cracked, opaque, but still reflecting something when the light hit it. He didn't show off, didn't boast, didn't brag to anyone. Sometimes, sitting at the end of the day, after a long day's work in the fields, he would open the package, look at the weak reflection of that same tired face as always, and remember. He remembered the fox. He remembered his father saying that the secret wasn't being strong, but being attentive. He remembered the destroyed corridor, the echoing enemy boots, the fear that almost paralyzed him, and the decision to aim through a piece of glass when any other man would have simply accepted death. People in the region knew he had gone to war. They knew he had returned different, quieter, more intense. From time to time, someone from outside would appear, an old officer, a comrade from the front, a curious journalist. They wanted to hear the story of the mirror trick, record numbers, talk of glory. He always answered little. He said he only did what he needed to do, that he didn't save the world, he only held up a building, that he wasn't a hero, he was stubborn. But the truth was different. In that forgotten corner of the map, on a day when all seemed lost, a simple man forged in the harshness of the land managed to be more lethal than the troops who considered themselves untouchable. He changed a battle. He changed routes. He shattered the confidence of men who thought themselves above fear. And he did it with something that everyone else would have thrown away. In the end, he didn't end up with medals hanging on the wall. He was left with calluses on his hands, scars on his body, and a shard of mirror kept as a secret. Sometimes at dawn, before going to the field, he would catch a glimpse of himself in that distorted reflection and think about how many things in life seem small, useless, ridiculous, until someone looks at them from a different angle. The war is over. The book's record numbers, dates, names that few read. But somewhere, between official accounts and whispers of veterans, the story of that sniper continues to be told as it should be, not as that of a super soldier, but of an ordinary man who, faced with the impossible, decided not to accept the obvious. A man, a rifle, and a broken mirror, against an entire enemy. And for an entire day of war, it was the enemy who was afraid to look at his reflection. After all that, what did you learn from the story of this ordinary man who became a legend using only a shard of mirror? If something in this journey resonated with you, be it the fear, the courage, the improbable intelligence, or the strength to not give up when everything seemed to, indicate the end. Leave a comment below describing what struck you the most. I'd love to know which part of this story has stayed with you. And before you go, take advantage and subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me continue to bring you deep, intense, and meaningful stories like this one. Thanks for watching until the end. Now tell me, what was the moment that surprised you the most?